As a matter for a talk, this is really going to be the short version of a lesson I kind of jumped over in the series of lessons, series of sermons from the letter to the Hebrews. Again, from our study this evening about the fundamental or the basic reasons for our soul's rejoicing, I want to touch back with that passage we considered in 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. In there, they are rejoicing in the word of the Lord. Rejoicing in the word of the Lord. And in verse 4, they are rejoicing still more with all who have believed it. It's the result of taking the word that they had received and sending it then to others to receive. And we probably yet will recall from verse 3, what's the result of that? That together, the apostles and all the others who received that word sent by them have fellowship in the word of life. And so what do we find in that? The apostles, as ministers of the gospel, were sent then to share it with others. And so certainly we would understand, according to our mission statement or our vision, that this gospel's not a private thing, is it? Not at all a private thing. Well, these thoughts I want to share with you are about our serving like Christ served in a public ministry. It's a public ministry. I believe we understand that we can come here and within these walls we can do everything in right and in order just as it ought to be pleasing to God. But what if that's all we're doing? I mean, if our service is only in here, that's a problem, is it not? Our better service is out there. I believe we all understand this is just a reinforcement of it. Our better service is out there, our ministry to the public. We gather this from Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. I want you to notice particularly there. Jeffrey, if you would, read that for us. Hebrews 8, 1 through 3.
The point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by man. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one also to have something to offer.
Verse 2. There's a word that talks about Jesus' ministry in there. His ministry. I don't remember, Jeff, if the translation you were reading had the word ministry in there, did it? Verse 2. Talked about it being servant. Yeah. Okay, served in the sanctuary. Same word for minister. His ministry. The word is only found 6 times, but it's liturgos. Liturgos. It's the word from which we get liturgy. That form of worship where someone reads from the Bible and everyone in turn responds, that's liturgical. But here, speaking of Jesus, it's talking about a public ministry. Outside of the old physical temple, he's not serving in the temple. He can't even get near the temple. But this public ministry for a gathering, the sanctuary is a place of gathering in the true tabernacle. When we talk about the true tabernacle, pitched by God, that's people, is it not? That's people. And more so in verse 6 of that same chapter, talks about Jesus' more excellent service. That even from heaven, where he's now at the right hand of God, his more excellent service is to mankind. It's a service to the public, to the people. Again, it's that word liturgos. And it, as Jeff read, we have such a high priest. He's serving the needs of people. We might say he's a people person. You know, our brother Roger often likes to say that we're in the people business, in the business of seeking to save souls. And that's still, as Jesus, that's still his business, is it not? Seeking to save souls. In verse 3 it says it was necessary that the priest have something to offer. And he did. But we as Christians now, as being a royal priesthood, is it not necessary that we also have something to offer God? And what is that? As a royal priesthood. It's not only a sacrifice of worship in here, it's a sacrifice of service out there, is it not? That's what you're talking about doing on Friday, Dan. You know, a sacrifice of service. There's a young lady who needs some help, and we can help, and we seek to do that. And so that's the ministry that we need to understand is ours. Other scriptures well establish the point. In Romans 13 and verse 6. Romans 13, beginning in verse 6, then through 8, Paul's answering questions to everybody that wants to challenge him at every turn. And there's so many questions. And there the debate is whether or not they should have to pay taxes to Rome. Everybody wants to know, and Paul takes care of that. He tells them, yes, pay taxes to those to whom they are due. And then what's he do? He turns the situation a bit, doesn't he? He says, like that, Paul is a minister of the gospel, turns that to what should be happening, not to those above you to whom you pay taxes, but how do you treat one another? Love one another. Love actually being owed to one another. There in Romans 13 and verse 6. Speaks as servants of God. That again is that word liturgos. It's a public ministry. Like Paul going from place to place, always seeking to teach and to serve. And so we can gather from that our rendering service to mankind is really the best means of offering service to God. Yes, he wants our worship here on the Lord's Day. What's he want every day? Our service to God, to man. It does explain what Paul meant in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. Romans 12 and verse 1. He talks about offering our bodies as a living sacrifice acceptable to God, which is our spiritual service, or our reasonable service. Counting what we know we've received from God, it's just reasonable that we're going to serve man and hopefully to bring them also into the fold, into the true tabernacle of God. I think it's fairly easy to get the picture from this. We understand that while our worship in here is important, while our service to one another in here is important, if that's all there is, God's not going to be pleased, is he? Our service, the sacrifice of our life, is out there. It's out there. Again, we can do everything we ought to in here. But what is required of us is that service out there. And it is yet true. It's the same kind of public ministry that Paul offered in Romans 15 and verse 16. And there Paul is describing himself as a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles. It's not a ministry. It's not a ministry unless it's to somebody else. So he's a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles in Romans 15 and verse 16. Paul's service is that of publicly preaching the gospel, and doing so brought those Gentiles into the fold, again, into the tent of God. It is the ministry, then, in which Paul rejoiced. Over in Philippians 2, verse 25 and 26. Paul could be, we suspect, could be content to have someone serve him, but he's not. In that passage of Philippians, it's about Epaphroditus. He talks about Epaphroditus having served Paul very well. You know, there's whatever ministry it was a personal thing between Epaphroditus and Paul. But then Paul could be quite satisfied with that. But what did he do? He in turn sends this fellow worker out to minister to the concerns of others. It's not about Paul. It's about others. And we get the picture, it's pretty clear, that Christianity is not about what's in it for me. Oh, it is, but more so about what's in it for others. You know, we find so often people are looking for a church home. And what are they looking for? A place that pleases them, a place that suits them. Let's go to a place that has the kind of worship that I want. You know, it's what's in it for me. No, it's more about what's in it for others. More about what's in it for others. Paul had given his life to serve others. And why did he do it? So that they may come to have what he has. That they may come to know the joy that he has found. It's the same way of God speaking of his own Son in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 7. That's that passage about God having spoken at various times in various ways through many ways, but now at last speaking through his Son. It is the Son in Hebrews 1 and verse 7 who is better than the angels. And then what does he do in verse 7? Who makes his angels winds and ministers, that's that word again, liturgus, and ministers of a flame of fire. So Jesus, having authority over the angels, he sends them out as mighty winds and as angels of light. They sent to serve the world as angels of light. Is that not also what we're to be? Certainly it is. Paul goes on to say in Philippians 2 and verse 15, speaking of disciples appearing as lights in the world. Again, if we can do everything right and in order to please God in here, but our ministry, our work, our service is out there. Our better service is out there in the public. And that is our cause for rejoicing. Just as it was, again, if I can touch back to 1 John chapter 1 again. They received the word and had fellowship in it, therefore they sent it to others. and then had fellowship with them. And what did he say that is? That is complete joy. To take what we have, send it to others so they can find what we have found, and then be of the same mind in it. That is complete joy. Just a few thoughts about our vision statement, about our mission statement. What's the service? As Paul says in Romans 12 and verse 1, it's just our reasonable spiritual service. And I hope you're encouraged by that. There are good things happening here. People are reaching out. People have more of a top-of-mind awareness about the need to do so, about the need to serve others, and looking for ways to do so. And by that, God is pleased. Again, it's the reason for joy. It's the reason that as we continue in the faith, it seems to get sweeter. Doesn't it? Sweeter? That's what we're going to sing about in that invitation song in a moment. These things that become sweeter as the days go by. Because we're doing what we ought to do, serving one another as the days go by. If there's some way that you might be encouraged this evening, not only in your own faith in a personal way, but in sharing that with others. Not getting so consumed with all the obligations that we think, or that we indeed have, and the things that we are sure we must get done, and we must get them done now. But serving one another. That's our ministry. Serving one another. If there's any way we might help you, might pray for you, might encourage you, if you would then respond to the invitation as together we stand to sing.